If you're in Seattle, and you need to buy or sell a home, we'll be right there for you. Because we're the realtors that you can trust. So go to ronanddonsitdown.com.
You're listening to The Ron and Don Show on the Ron and Don Radio Network.
Hey, you guys, what's going on? Welcome to a special edition of The Ron and Don Show, and we hope when you hear this episode that you'll share this episode with people that you know. Now, a lot of you know that Em Bremner is a dear friend of mine, and she's also a dear friend of the show, and we have done some incredible things together with Em Bremner, who is attorney to the stars. You can't be an attorney to the stars, though, if you don't have a private investigator to invest the stars and also to investigate other people. Rose Winquist is here right now. I know that Ann can't be here because I understand she just went through surgery. So more than thoughts and prayers, I actually tried to bring by some tequila to her this weekend, and she said she wasn't home. So nonetheless, she's through surgery and she's out and about, so that's good news. Rose is here because something just happened, and you've probably seen this on King 5 or Cairo 7, Channel 13. I know David Rose has talked a lot about this story, and there's been a break in the case, and I can remember living here for years, and they were always talking about Tanya Frazier, who was a middle school student down south of Seattle. I guess we call that Tacoma?
No, CD. It was the Central District.
In the Central District.
In Seattle.
It's 1994, and Rose is an investigator on a team that is looking into not only the disappearance, but then the murder of Tanya Frazier, right?
Right.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what it was like back in 1994, and then we'll talk a little bit about Mark Anthony Russ, who recently was connected to this case. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So back in 1994, I was contacted by the St. Clement's Church, a little church up on Capitol Hill. That's where Tira, Tanya's sister, and Tanya went to Sunday school. And the church was very concerned because this 14-year-old turned up missing. And the police initially thought she was a runaway, which was kind of common back then. Obviously, that turned out not to be the case. Tanya disappeared on July 18th. Her body was found on July 23rd, about 5 blocks from Meany Middle School, where she was seen walking to the bus stop where she was going to catch the bus and go to her little job. She was going to summer school, and her job required her to be a student. So she was a very determined little kid. She decided she would get a job at the Chicken Soup Brigade. I don't know if you remember that. But she was on her way to work and disappeared. And then a week later, as I said, her body was found just off of Highland Drive outside of the Arboretum.
Yeah. So this is decades ago. You guys begin to investigate this. What are some of the tools you didn't have then that you have now?
Pretty much everything. Internet was only starting, really. There was all the court records and everything were only available through the court. You had to schlep down there and get things. Interviews were done by knocking on people's doors and calling landlines. It was just a completely different era. So when we initially got the case, we met with people at the church. We met with Tira and Teresa, Tanya's mother and sister, and began outside of the police our own investigation, because at that time and for the last 30 plus years, it's been an ongoing investigation with police. So they don't give me any information.
Yeah. For people that don't understand this, and just tell me if I'm wrong, but in our years of doing investigative stories that Ron and I did at Cairo Radio, this is what we found. And again, just tell me if I'm wrong. And I don't think this is playing a race card if it's a fact. If Tanya happened to be my next door neighbor up on Queen Anne in Seattle, right, where I live, and let's say she was not a person of color, but let's say that she was a white girl that went to Cole Middle School up there, would the response from the community sometimes, is it different depending on race and also depending on where these crimes have a tendency, or sometimes they don't have a tendency to happen, right?
It's very different based on socioeconomic culture and race. Tanya is a little biracial kid. She's not a blue-eyed, blonde-haired ponytail from Mercer Island who's going to cheerleading camp. That wasn't, the case. She lived in a, no, I wouldn't say poverty, but I would say lower middle class neighborhood, right near Mount Baker, which is now pretty affluent, actually. Back then it wasn't. And she, walked to school. She took the bus everywhere. She, for whatever reason, she felt safe in the city, and she wasn't.
Yeah. So when we think about suspects, sometimes when you're a family member, it's the hardest, especially if you're the family member that didn't do it, especially if you're a male family member, because you're sitting there grieving the loss of someone you really loved and cared about. And at the same time, police typically come to you because a lot of times it is a male family member that's involved in something so egregious, right?
More often than not.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a family. Generally, it's the mother's boyfriend, or it's the next door neighbor, somebody who's very familiar with the family and the kids. In this case, that was not true. I do think in this case that it wasn't random per se. I think that Tanya knew her killer in some way, probably through either just walking by his mother. That's the other thing, is his mother had a house on Thomas Street, which was just about 3 doors down from Meady Middle School. So she'd been going to summer school for about 2 weeks, and she'd walked that route 5 days a week, every day she was in summer school. So he had an opportunity to see her there, most certainly, and that is where she was abducted.
Yeah. Let's talk about he. His name is Mark Anthony Russ. Who is Mark Anthony Russ? Why has he been arrested, and how did he cross paths with her decades ago?
Okay, so Mark Anthony Russ is a violent criminal. He has a very, very bad past. He began in 1988. He was probably around 20 years old. He was born in 68, so in 1988 he was 20. In 1987, he was convicted of his first felony, and that was he stabbed his wife multiple times. And so he was convicted of that. He went to prison for that, or jail. I'm not really sure. I haven't got those records yet, but I'm getting them. And then in 1990, he committed another crime. I believe it was a second-degree robbery or an assault. And then throughout 91, there was a couple more felonies. And by 93, again, he assaulted, his wife. And he also did an armed robbery at the place that he worked. And then by 1996, he committed a home invasion and attempted rape and robbery. And that's what put him in prison for 24 years. He was under the 3 strikes back then. So he went to prison. He appealed it in 1996. He appealed that case. And then by 1998, he went to prison. And he was there until 2021, when he was released under the new law changing the 3 strikes. So when he got out, he didn't stop. He continued to commit crime. There's a domestic violence order right now against him for, I'm not sure what, I don't have the record yet, but another woman he violated, and there was a warrant outstanding when the police arrested him for murdering Tanya. So this guy is a career criminal who, in my opinion, should have never been let out. Not that that would have mattered today in Tanya's case, because he did go to prison ultimately for 24 years, thank God. But it makes me wonder, the law in 1990 required institutions, the Department of Corrections, to take person's DNA, the violent criminals' DNA, when they were released into the community. So in 1990, they didn't do that. In 1991, they didn't do that. In 1993, they didn't do that. And they only did it in 2021 when he was released from the Department of Corrections. So why they didn't do that for all those years is a big question in my mind. And could it have prevented him from killing Tanya.
So this happens in 94. He goes to prison in 98. He's out in 2021. Here we are in 2025. And I finally see it in the headlines. I see your name. He's arrested. What was the connection with DNA? And we all watch the real crime shows like Happily Never After or Snapped. And it seems like it's usually like a straw. Someone went to Five Guys and they left their straw in the cup, or they licked a piece of pizza and they put it back in the box, and then Rose came along and found the pizza box, or you found the cup. So
I've actually done that.
You have?
I have.
That really works.
It does work.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
So what happened here? How were they able to connect the DNA?
Yeah. So in this case, the police have evidence that was gathered in 1994 from the medical examiner's office, and they do a very thorough job. Back then they didn't know how technology was going to go forward, right? So they
did know it was going to go forward.
Yeah,
they did know it would go forward, because you see, around that time, so many folks in law enforcement started treasuring the DNA, knowing, hey, in the future, someone may figure this out, right?
Yeah, the ME at that time, I think it was Dr. Ray. I'm trying to remember. It could be Harif, but I think it was Dr. Ray in 1994. And, God bless him. He did a beautiful job gathering the DNA, and the police did a beautiful job preserving it. That's the big thing. So, back then, you had to be very careful with DNA because you only had a certain amount, and you had to make sure that you had enough to preserve for the defense when and if they ever got a charge. So it was carefully handled back then, and continuing, they had to be careful because they just weren't sure. Now, of course, you can get DNA from the air, so it's a whole different thing. But how they got it was there was a swab collected from the medical examiner's office from Tanya's thigh, and it was sperm. And at the time, I don't know that they even knew that. They knew it going forward. So what the police do in cases like this is they submit DNA, and with the hope that there's going to be a hit, and SPD has done a great job in submitting this DNA over the course of time. You can only do so much. And finally, they submitted and then resubmitted. They probably took the swabs that were gathered at autopsy.
So, and the reason is they'll submit it, then they let some time go by because someone else may have gotten arrested, right, and had to give up their DNA, or somehow it ended up in the computer. So they'll submit it from time to time. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a little more complicated. I think in Tanya's case, they had trouble initially separating the DNA. There was multiple DNA, which can happen if you're taking DNA off someone's underwear, for example. If they're MVACing it, they could get multiple sources of DNA. So then they have to separate those. And depending on where technology was at the time, I don't think they could.
What is MVACing? Because I want to use that word next time. I tell everyone. I had Rose on my show, and we were talking about doing some MVACing. Yeah, is that like just a vacuum cleaner?
Think of it like a carpet cleaner. Like you're a house guy, right?
Yeah.
So think of it as one of those steam cleaners that shoots water into the fabric and then sucks it back out, and then they separate that from the DNA. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's pretty cool.
So in this case, what happened? How did they get him?
What happened was that they submitted DNA that was a swab taken from the ME in 1994, and because Mark Anthony Russ has gotten out of prison, and his DNA was taken in 2021. When they submitted that, kaboom. Yeah. So, but prior to that, they actually had what they called individual A, which was his DNA. They were able to finally extract one sample of his specific DNA. And they didn't have a hit because he wasn't in CODIS.
Yeah.
Because his DNA had never been taken.
Yeah. Sometimes rapists don't mean to kill, and they do. And it seems like he's a rapist and a killer. I know you're here today because we want to kind of kick the bushes a little bit. And if there's anybody else out there that this story resonates with, or you have some thoughts, or you remember somebody said something once, because that's kind of how these things go. Are we looking for a serial rapist here? Are we looking for a serial killer here? What do you think in all your years of investigating these stories?
I think it's entirely possible that he's a serial rapist, if not a serial killer. Now they have him in CODIS. I think the problem is if there were rapes committed, the rapes would have been committed between 1987 and 1996. Because in 96, he went to prison for 22 years. So the problem is the statute of limitations has run on any and all rapes he might have done in that period of time. And we know that his DNA wasn't taken. So unless they filed a John Doe rape, which they do, and have been successful in letting those cases, the statute can go for quite a long time because it's filed. So I'm not privy to any of that, but I would have to think that there are other victims out there. I know of at least 2 other victims. And unfortunately, one of them, didn't go to the police. She was scared. She was only 16 and he abducted her and she got away. So she wasn't where she was supposed to be when she was with him. And he took her off the street. Yeah. He lured her, much like he lured Tanya.
Yeah. Are these stories mostly closer to 1994, or do you think we're going to find stories as well, Rose, when he got out in 2021?
I think it's entirely possible that there are stories from 2021. And maybe they just haven't processed through yet. Remember, we've only been a week. We're only a week out. Well, the DNA has been there with him, but whether or not there was DNA put into the system that would link him to others is the big question. Yeah. I don't think he was in prison for 24 years. So there may or may not be reports between 21 and 25. I know he was still committing crime after he got out, and I have to think that he was probably, he may have been a little more careful because he knew about technology, and I'm thinking this has been kind of hanging over his head. When he got out in 21, he had his DNA taken, and he was probably wondering, what that was how that was gonna manifest, and here we are.
Yeah. So, what happens for Mark Anthony Russ moving forward here, and where's he right now, and what would it cost to get him out of jail if somebody wanted to?
He's in King County Jail. He is in no bail. Mm-hmm. He was arraigned yesterday. He pled not guilty. And that's where we are. There's an omnibus hearing on December 5th, and they're scheduled to go to trial on December 22nd, which they won't do. It's that there's no way that's going to happen. I'd be surprised if we see trial in a year.
Yeah. I had a really good friend, and I was in high school. He's a few years older, and I remember we were sitting in a pizza shop one time. His name was Dave, and his mom came in, and his mom worked at a local store, and his mom had some issues in her life, but she got things turned around, and she was on her way to the store, and she'd come by because she wanted his Christmas gift list. So he shared that with her. We never saw her again. And then we would find her killer and her rapist a number of years later. What was really hard about that is just the way that the police handled it. I remember dealing with a state trooper, and he pulled out a plastic garbage bag, and it's in the middle of a snowstorm, and he just dumped everything on the back of the car. We were out doing our own searches on horseback and snowshoe, and we would finally find her at some point chained to a cactus, and the killers were the next door neighbors. They'd stolen all her money, stole her new car, and then used the car to drive over her over and over again. And they had raped her initially, and then they killed her. So I remember being with him when that killer called. He was in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time, and he said, "Hey, I hear that you're a Christian, and I was wondering if you'd forgive me and maybe stand up for me because they're about to put me to death." And he said, "I do forgive you, but an eye for an eye," and hung up the phone. So he said, you never really people always say it brings closure, and I wanted to bring it back to Tanya and her family a little bit, because I know for Dave, anytime you bring up his mom or anytime he sees a Ford Escort, an old one, because that's what she drove, it brings it all up again. And I would wonder what it would be like to be a family member, and even when you just share that, hey, and we have to share these things because it's important for people to know. But when you hear that, hey, they found ejaculation on her thigh, those types of things, how is the family doing today, and how are they dealing with this? Because at some point, you do want there to be justice, but boy, it must just, in the same way it stirs it all up for Dave, it must stir it all up for them, I bet, right?
Yeah. No, they desperately want justice. They desperately want answers, despite how painful that might be for them. Teresa, Tanya's mom, said to me the other day, I don't know why, but I just feel like I want to know what her last words were. I want to know what she said to him. I want to know where he took her. I want to know how long he kept her. Those are questions that are excruciating to have the answers to, but nonetheless, this family wants to know. When I watched Tira yesterday in court, when that guy came into the room, I don't know if you've been to the 12th floor of the King County Courthouse. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's kind of a barrier between the courtroom where the attorneys are, and behind that, it's a wall, glass wall with seating for the public. And when she saw him come into the room being escorted from the jail, she jumped out of her seat and went straight to the window where she could stare him down, and she did. And he wouldn't look up. She was trying to make eye contact with him. Wow. Yeah, it was powerful. And all I can see is, this 12-year-old little girl. She's now, Tanya would have been 46 years old. Tira is 45 years old with children and married children. And all I can see when I look at her is this little 12-year-old with her eyes welling up with tears. It's horrible. That pain brings her back to 12. Yeah. And that's what she's dealing with.
Yeah. If this story resonates with anyone, or they think they might have some information concerning Mark Anthony, and it's Mark Anthony Russ.
Russ, R-U-S-S. Sam is Sam.
Yeah.
R-U-S as in Sam.
How can they get in touch with you, Rose? Because you guys continue to investigate, and we want to find out if there's other cases here that have not been solved yet.
Absolutely. They can go to my website. It's winquistinvestigations.com, or I'm all over Facebook, Rose Winquist or Rosemary Winquist, PI. Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you do this? And people would say, well, she does it for the excitement. And I know, and knowing a lot of attorneys and folks that are private investigators, there's a lot of time where there is no excitement. We see that on television shows, right? And everything's solved in an hour.
Right.
Why is this so important for you, and why have you invested so much time? And a lot of people on your team have done this, they've donated their time as well. So
my time has been donated for 32 years. I've never charged this family a penny. I'm committed to this case. I was committed to this case back then. I had kids. I had teenagers during that time. It changed the way I parented. It changed the way I taught my kids how to look around and how to be really, really clear about your surroundings and where you were and who was around you. And from my perspective, when I decided to help this family, that became a commitment. Just like anything else in life, if you decide you're going to do something and you tell them you're going to see it through, then you're going to see it through. And that was Teresa's biggest fear. It was that she was not going to be able to see this through and be alive to see this day come. She's, the other thing I see in families that are going through this kind of stuff, when they lose kids, it affects them not only emotionally, but physically. Teresa is 10 years younger than I am, and she can barely move. She can barely walk. Her hips are causing her problems. Her leg is causing her problems. She's just physically, it's taken its toll.
Trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah, trauma is a bitch.
100%. And it has taken its physical toll and emotional toll on both of them.
Yeah. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for everything that you do. We love you and the Ann Bremners of the world, and we love that you're out there. Real quick, I have to know, sometimes with guys like this, especially if they feel like they're in a state where they're not going to get the death penalty, they like to stay in the news. They like, even if it's negative, they want to be on King 5 tonight. So do you see him pleading, or do you think this is going to go on for years in the courts? What's going to happen?
I think it's going to go on. And the reason I think that is because what's he got to lose by pleading not guilty? If he pleads guilty, nothing is going to be accepted other than life in prison and no parole ever. If he pleads not guilty, he has a slim chance of fooling one juror. I don't know. Yeah. I see that as unlikely, but I think he'd take that risk. I don't think he's a guy that wants to be in the media. I think he's a guy, he's a coward. You know, he stood there yesterday with his head down. He wouldn't look at Tira. And, you know, he's married. He's currently married, and his wife couldn't figure out how to divorce him. She hasn't been with him since '94, basically.
The leverage, though, and then we'll finish here. The leverage of the death penalty that they were able to use on Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, they were able to say, hey, it's the death penalty, and if not, tell us everything you know. If the death penalty wasn't, and Ron and I have talked about this before, and we probably have different feelings on it, that's not a point of leverage here, right? So,
right.
So I mean, do you like having the death penalty as a form of leverage? How do you feel about that?
I like having the death penalty as a form of leverage. I'm not a fan of the death penalty, but I do think it absolutely brings leverage. And like Gary Ridgway, and he had to explain himself. Right. And I think in this case, the death penalty, there's a moratorium on it. It's not correct. It's not out of law. Mm-hmm. You know, Ann pointed this out to me the other day. She said, we still have the death penalty in this state. It's just not being used. Mm-hmm. And so, she's correct in that. But no, I do think that could absolutely have impact on what he comes forward with if that were a possibility in his case.
Yeah. Rose, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Don.
Appreciate you coming in.
Really appreciate it.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Ron, thanks for giving up your chair for Rose. We appreciate that.
Thanks, Ron.
That's a special edition of the Ron and Don Show. And again, if you guys know anything about Mark Anthony Russ, or anything about these stories going back to the early 90s, or anything that was heard by someone in jail, and maybe you have an uncle who has a brother who was incarcerated, like that's how a lot of these stories get out. At least they do on Snapped. I love Snapped. Channel 526, you guys, on the Discovery Channel, if you're looking for true crime. So make sure you just reach out to Rose one more time if people want to get in touch with you if they know something.
Yeah, it's WinquistInvestigations.com or Rosemary Earp Winquist, P.I. on Facebook.
Thanks. Hey, you guys, you've been listening to the Ron and Don Show. Don't forget to keep your head up and your shoulders back, and we'll see you next time. That's right. You've been listening to the Ron and Don Show only on the Ron and Don Radio Network.
Well, that's it. Show's over. We'll see you next time on the Ron and Don Radio Network.